In the limestone caves of Borneo, 31,000 years beneath our feet, lies a truth that makes modern medicine look like child's play. The skeleton rests exactly where death found it, a young person, perhaps 20 years old, whose left leg ends abruptly below the knee. But this isn't the jagged break of accident or the gnawed remnants of predator attack. This is surgery. The femur bears the unmistakable marks of careful, deliberate cutting, clean, precise, intentional. More remarkable still, the bone shows something that should be impossible: healing. This person didn't die on some prehistoric operating table. They lived 4 years. The bone grew smooth and rounded where flesh once covered the surgical site. Evidence of a body that adapted, survived, and thrived, despite what should have been a death sentence. How do you amputate a human limb with nothing but sharpened stone? How do you prevent infection without understanding bacteria? How do you manage pain without pharmaceutical intervention? How do you even conceive that such a procedure might save rather than kill? We call ourselves the pinnacle of medical advancement. Yet here in the darkness of deep time lies evidence that our ancestors achieved what we would consider miraculous with tools we would dismiss as primitive. This isn't just bone and stone. This is the collapse of everything we thought we knew about human capability, about progress, about the supposed linear march from ignorance to enlightenment. The young person in Borneo lived in a world where survival demanded knowledge we've forgotten, skills we've abandoned, and courage we've traded for comfort. They faced the impossible and made it routine. Their healer looked at a shattered limb and saw not hopelessness, but possibility. They picked up a stone blade and performed surgery. We are about to journey into a world where being human meant something different, where every breath was earned, every day survived was a victory, and where the difference between life and death often rested in hands guided by wisdom we no longer possess. The evidence speaks in whispers from graves that predate civilization itself. In France, archaeologists uncovered a skull from 6,500 BCE, bearing the circular mark of trepanation, a hole deliberately drilled through the cranium to relieve pressure on the brain. The bone around the opening shows clear signs of healing, meaning the patient not only survived the procedure, but lived long enough for their skull to grow back around the surgical site. This wasn't desperation surgery. This was neurosurgery performed with stone tools, and the success rate appears to have been remarkably high. Across Europe, dozens of trypan skulls show evidence of healing, suggesting that Stone Age surgeons understood something about intracranial pressure that wouldn't be formally recognized by modern medicine until the 19th century. In the Shanidar cave of Iraq, Neanderthal remains tell stories that shatter our assumptions about prehistoric compassion. One skeleton belonged to a man who lived to old age despite being born with significant physical disabilities. His arm was withered, his right side partially paralyzed, and he was likely blind in one eye. Yet the wear patterns on his teeth and the condition of his bones prove he was cared for, fed, and protected by his group for decades. Someone made the choice, again and again, that his life had value worth preserving. But perhaps most astonishing is the dental work. In northern Italy, 14,000-year-old teeth show clear evidence of therapeutic intervention, cavities carefully cleaned and packed with plant-based materials, infected roots removed with precision that would impress modern These weren't lucky accidents or natural occurrences. These were skilled medical procedures performed by people who understood anatomy, pathology, and treatment. The forensic analysis is painstaking and unforgiving. Archaeologists can distinguish between cuts made by stone tools and marks left by animal teeth. They can identify the direction of blade strokes, the sequence of cuts, the deliberate staging of complex procedures. What emerges is a picture of medical knowledge that was systematic, sophisticated, and successful. At Kafsa Cave in Israel, researchers discovered evidence of herbal medicine dating back 55,000 years. Microscopic residues of plants with known medicinal properties, carefully processed and applied to human remains. These weren't random gatherings of vegetation. These were pharmaceutical preparations, the world's first prescriptions written not on paper, but in the very bones of those they healed. The Borneo amputation isn't an anomaly. It's part of a pattern stretching across continents and millennia, evidence of a medical tradition that understood the human body with an intimacy we've largely lost. These healers didn't have textbooks or medical schools. They had observation, experimentation, and the irreplaceable teacher of life or death consequences. Imagine carrying the weight of 30 lives in your hands in a hunter-gatherer band. Losing even one person to a treatable condition could mean the difference between survival and extinction. The healer bore this knowledge like a stone in their chest, every decision final, every mistake potentially catastrophic. These weren't societies that could afford specialists in the modern sense. The person who could set bones was also the tracker, the storyteller, the keeper of plant knowledge. Yet the archaeological evidence suggests that some individuals did develop specialized medical skills, accumulating knowledge across decades of practice and passing it down through generations of careful teaching. The amputation in Borneo required knowledge that takes modern surgeons years to acquire. The healer would have needed to understand circulation, identifying exactly where to place the tourniquet to prevent fatal blood loss. They would have needed to know which muscles to cut, which bones to saw, how to shape the remaining tissue to promote healing rather than infection. They would have needed antiseptic knowledge, which plants could clean wounds, which could fight infection, which could manage pain. Stone tools, when properly knapped, can achieve edges sharper than modern surgical steel, but wielding them requires a steadiness of hand and sureness of purpose that comes only from profound understanding. The person who performed that amputation had done this before. They had developed techniques, refined approaches, learned from both successes and failures. Consider the psychological weight. There was no emergency room to transfer to, no backup surgeon to call, no antibiotics to fall back on if infection set in. The healer had to make the decision to cut, knowing that they were betting someone's life on their skill alone. They had to look into the eyes of someone's child, parent, or partner, and take responsibility for what came next. Yet they did it, not once, but repeatedly, across thousands of years and thousands of miles. They performed brain surgery with stone blades. They treated infections with plant medicines. They set complex fractures and managed chronic pain. They understood that amputation could save a life, that trepanation could relieve suffering, that careful intervention could mean the difference between death and decades of continued existence. The burden they carried was different from what modern doctors face. It was more personal, more immediate, more inescapable. In a group of 30 people, everyone knew everyone. The patient wasn't a case number or a medical file. They were the person who shared fire with you, who helped track game, who told stories that made children laugh. Healing them wasn't just medical necessity, it was love made practical, community made manifest. This was medicine as sacred responsibility, practiced by people who understood that knowledge carried obligation, that skill demanded service, that the difference between life and death was often nothing more than the willingness to try when trying seemed impossible. We gained everything and lost something essential. Modern medicine can transplant hearts, cure cancers, and extend life far beyond what our ancestors could imagine. Yet somehow, in our triumph over disease, we've forgotten how to heal. The Stone Age healer knew their patient's entire story. They knew which plants grew near their home, what foods they ate, how they slept, who they loved, what worried them in the dark hours before dawn. They knew because knowing was survival, not just for the patient, but for everyone who depended on that patient's recovery. Today's specialist sees the liver, the heart, the nervous system. The Stone Age healer saw the person. They understood that healing happened, not just in the body but in the mind, the family, the community. They knew that a patient's environment was as important as their anatomy, that social connection could be as powerful as any medicine. Prevention wasn't a department or a strategy, it was a way of life. The healer watched for the early signs of illness, the subtle changes that spoke of trouble ahead. They intervened before crisis, adjusted lifestyle before catastrophe. They understood that maintaining health was easier than restoring it, though they were prepared to do both. There's a particular irony in how we've structured modern healing. We've created systems so complex that patients often feel more lost than helped, bounced between specialists who know their condition but not their story. We've gained precision and lost presence. We've mastered technique and forgotten touch. The ancient healers had no choice but to be present. When infection threatened, they sat vigil. When pain consumed, they stayed close. When recovery faltered, they adjusted course. They couldn't prescribe something and move on to the next patient. They had to see their treatments through to completion, success or failure. This isn't nostalgia for a world of higher infant mortality and shorter lifespans. The past held real suffering that modern medicine has genuinely alleviated. But in our rush toward technological solutions, we've often forgotten that healing is ultimately a human activity, requiring human presence, human intuition, human connection. The Stone Age healer understood something we're only beginning to rediscover, that the body heals better when the person feels seen, understood, valued. That recovery isn't just about fixing what's broken, but about restoring wholeness. That medicine isn't just intervention, it's relationship. We've traded the intimate knowledge of the village healer for the statistical knowledge of the medical system. We've gained the ability to treat rare diseases and lost the wisdom of treating common humanity. We know more about healing than ever before, yet somehow, healing has become more difficult. The hands that shaped flint into surgical instruments still live in ours. The minds that mapped the human body through touch and observation still pulse in our thoughts. The hearts that refuse to accept suffering as inevitable still beat in our chests. We are not different people. We are the same people with different tools. This recognition changes everything. The Borneo surgeon wasn't superhuman. They were human in the deepest sense, faced with impossible circumstances, equipped with inadequate resources, yet choosing to act with courage and skill. They looked at a shattered leg and saw not just destruction but possibility. They picked up a stone blade not in desperation but in hope. Modern research continues to validate ancient wisdom. Willow bark, used by prehistoric healers for pain relief, contains the precursor to aspirin. Honey applied to wounds by Stone Age physicians proves to be one of nature's most effective plants our ancestors used for surgery contain compounds we now synthesize for anesthesia. They didn't understand the chemistry, but they understood the results. The techniques they developed still influence modern practice. Trepanation, refined over millennia by Stone Age surgeons, remains a standard neurosurgical procedure. The principles of wound care they established, cleaning, drainage, protection, form the foundation of contemporary treatment. Their understanding of anatomy, gained through necessity rather than textbook, guided surgical approaches we still use today. But the deepest validation isn't scientific. It's human. Every time a modern surgeon makes a desperate attempt to save a life, they echo the choice made by that ancient healer in Borneo. Every time medical knowledge passes from teacher to student, it continues a chain of learning that stretches back 30,000 years. Every time healing happens, it honors the memory of those who first refused to accept that suffering was inevitable. The Stone Age healer worked in darkness. Literally, they had no understanding of germ theory. No knowledge of anatomy beyond what they could observe, no tools beyond what they could make. Yet they achieved what we would consider miraculous because they possessed something we sometimes forget: the absolute conviction that human life has value worth fighting for, worth risking for, worth dedicating a lifetime to preserving. Their legacy isn't in the specific techniques they developed or the particular procedures they performed. Their legacy is in the recognition that being human means refusing to accept the unacceptable, pushing beyond the possible, and never giving up on each other. They looked at a destroyed limb and saw a life worth saving. They faced impossible odds and chose to act anyway. We are their inheritors, not just of their DNA but of their determination. The memory lives in our hands, the wisdom echoes in our choices, and the courage that drove them to pick up stone blades and perform miracles still drives us to heal, to help, to refuse to let suffering have the final word. In the end, that may be the most profound surgery of all, the one that cuts away despair and leaves hope behind. The operation that removes resignation and implants possibility. The procedure that amputates hopelessness and allows life to continue, stronger and more precious for having been saved.